says it's shutting down the consumer version of Google Plus after users' personal information was exposed. The company says the personal data of about 500,000 people was exposed between 2015 and March of this year. That data included email addresses, ages, gender, relationship status, among other information. Google says it found no evidence the information was misused. Google has known about the bug since March, but didn't tell users about it until the Wall Street Journal revealed the issue on Monday. The Journal says Google feared disclosing the incident could lead to stricter regulation. Now, in a statement, a Google spokesperson said, quote, "Every year we send millions of notifications to users about privacy and security bugs and issues. Whenever users' data may have been affected, we go beyond our legal requirements and apply several criteria focused on our users in determining whether to provide notice." But they didn't provide notice in this case, and to learn why and what this means is CNET senior producer Dan Patterson. Okay, first, Dan, help us understand what exactly was breached.
Okay, so Google Plus, right? Remember Google Plus?
Vaguely.
So the application programming interface, the API that about 300 developers used, allowed access to this private information of, you see those little dialog boxes that say, give my information to friends or friends of friends. They were able to access private information on your profile and perhaps on your friends or your connections profile information.
So even if I said I wanted something to be private, this breach allowed my friends to unwittingly share my information with these developers.
It seems that way, although details are kind of sparse right now.
And Google estimates, though they aren't able to give a firm number because they say they were constantly trashing the history of these transactions, they estimated at 500,000. We're not talking about social security numbers and credit cards here or the content of our Gmail archive. It seems like the cover-up is maybe getting more attention than the crime. Why is that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think the date and timing of the disclosure here is particularly important. So what was happening in March of 2018? Well, Facebook was getting pummeled by the Cambridge Analytica story. This breach by Google doesn't appear to be particularly sensitive, or the information doesn't appear to be particularly sensitive. But at that time, Facebook had this drip, drip, drip of bad information, and it would shift the narrative, the conversation, from Facebook over to Google back in March.
And when Facebook and Twitter went to Washington to speak to Congress, Google didn't show up, and that committee notably put a Google placard up in front of an empty chair to say, hey, Google's not here. Does this event make us think Google will think differently about privacy or Washington or any of these issues?
Well, look, Google takes privacy and user privacy very seriously, and all tech companies right now are re-examining their role with not just their users, but the data that their users provide to them. What this does tell us is about the future of regulation and what Google really thinks about regulation and our lawmakers. Look, our lawmakers have a lot of problems, but they're still our elected representatives, and when Google sends no one, it's a stiff finger to our representatives and to privacy and privacy regulation.
So given that Google's motivation, apparent motivation, was that this could encourage more regulation, let's talk a bit more broadly about regulation. What is possible? What are the discussions? Is this something that could be similar to what we saw in Europe over the summer?
Yeah, well, the GDPR, that's the General Data Protection Regulation, has pretty strict penalties for not enforcing consumer data protection. We see a very similar regulation popping up in California right now that could kind of echo many of the same fine points that are in the GDPR. However, regulation on a federal level is pretty unlikely right now. As steamed as lawmakers are at technology firms, it doesn't appear as though there is much movement on any type of real practical application that could protect consumer data.
And why is that? Lobbying, lack of familiarity with the issues. Why not? It seems like something people would care about. They would want their elected officials to do.
Well, you enumerated two of the biggest issues, but I think the third issue is people care, right? So it's one thing to see all of these big data breaches happen, Equifax, Facebook, now Google, Twitter. But it's another thing to connect the dots between those data breaches and what happens in my personal life. And to be honest, it's real hard to look at what happened with this Google data breach and say, well, come on, that was Google+. Who really cares about Google+? They're going to sunset the service anyway. How does this connect to my life? But when we see all of the bad things that can happen to you, particularly on the dark web, where hackers don't just take this data, they take data from all breaches and combine that into master data sets and sell that for pennies on the dollar. So if you value not just your privacy, but your future privacy and your ability to stay free of identity theft and other things that really can have a really negative impact on your life going forward, you should care about these types of data breaches.
Last thing, Gmail, the repository of so many of our lives over the last many years. Imagine if there were a Gmail hack. And today we see Google going to greater lengths to strengthen the privacy around our Gmail and what they'll let developers see in that archive. That said, we were talking earlier today about your choice to pay for a different version of Gmail than the one most of us use. What is that difference, and why is it enough of a difference for you to pay?
So there is the consumer version of Google applications. That's your Gmail, Google Docs, Google Photos. That stuff's all very useful, but it's also scanned by advertisers, and that data is used to resell you advertisements. That's fine, especially when we're giving up some privacy in terms of the keywords that are in our email, maybe not the entire body of an email, but that advertising, that data is sold for advertisers. I pay, and many people pay, for what's called G Suite. That is the corporate version of Gmail and Google applications. What this means is that I don't see advertisements and my data is not resold. Google also creates a key. Right now it's about $50, but this will keep people who are trying to brute force, meaning guess your password. Right now you're able to do what's called two-factor authentication, to have them give you a second password to log in.
I'm hoping that's good enough.
That's right. But this key fob really will detect other intruders and only allow you to access your Google account. So we should emphasize there was not a ton of information shared in this Google Plus hack or data breach, but that's because Google Plus is not a widely used social network and they are shutting it down. If hackers got into your Gmail account or your Google Docs account, especially your work account, that could have much bigger consequences.
And no doubt they're trying. Dan Patterson, thanks so much.
Good to be here.